Hi, this is Sean Murphy of SK Murphy. I'll be the MC for today's briefing on unruly meetings with Debbie Krause and Jenny Werla of CW Training and Consulting. Debbie and Jenny co-founded CW because they believe the key to successful execution of business strategy is enabling individual contributors to execute the tactics required to implement it. They assist their clients in workshops that focus on planning, execution, and team effectiveness. Their clients include Evernote, Box, Degreed, and Child Advocates of Silicon Valley. Debbie has an MBA from the Wharton School and is a certified DISC partner. Jenny has a BA in human biology from Stanford and is a CPPC certified coach. Ladies, take it away.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Welcome. All right, just getting things set up. Welcome, everybody. We are excited to be here. And we're just going to dive in because we tend to run hot if the conversations get great. Sean stole our thunder a bit. Thank you so much. One thing we want to highlight, these are the types of services we do. We do group workshops, which is our main thing, doing corporate workshops, but we also are dipping into individual training. We do a lot of these speaking gigs for our colleagues, which we enjoy, and we do project management coaching. So if that comes up for you or any of your colleagues, please reach out to us.
Now, today's objectives, we have we have some of our favorite content. We're going to share just a snippet of it. It's a way we've thought about how to identify particular challenges in meetings and provide sort of tips and ability to work, find the gold in the strength in each person's challenging behaviors and help manage those behaviors. So we know you also as a group have lots of experience, obviously being in meetings and running meetings. So we're looking for a dynamic and lively conversation, as well as sharing with you just a taste of this workshop we're delivering later in the month that goes into depth about how to handle these challenging meetings.
Yeah.
So it's in the chat, or you can just speak it aloud if that's easier. Just rate for us, scale of 1 to 5, how comfortable are you facilitating meetings? How well do you think you manage meetings when you have challenging personalities? And if you are so moved, just drop in maybe why. So I see that Nikki doesn't have, she feels like she has a lot of room for improvement. Why is that? Yeah, so Sean says he's had a lot of practice. So Sean, did you say? Yeah, so Sean has a 5. He's a master facilitator because he's done this a lot. Yeah, Nikki's new to running meetings. Fantastic. Teresa's a 4. Larry's a 4. Anad is a 3. So good. We've got a nice mix of experience. Again, is a 2. So we expect that there will be snippets and good takeaways for all of you, for the less experienced and also for the folks who have some mastery, as well as especially those folks with mastery can share some of their best practices as we get into our conversations.
Yeah. So what we're going to do is share our 5-step framework. Jenny and I are big on frameworks. And I think that's something to keep in mind as you're trying to learn about running excellent meetings, is that it's always useful to have a framework. Sometimes that framework is called an agenda, which we'll get into in a moment. So we're going to walk through these steps. Today, we're really going to focus on the personalities that make meetings go off course. We have a big mix of people with different experience. So I'm glad that we dropped in some of our fundamentals, as we call it, because we feel like the fundamentals are the things that get us started, that are kind of lay the groundwork for a successful meeting. Sorry. So the first is test for value add. Should you even have a meeting to begin with? Right? So most of you get this probably. You should help your clients and yourself kill those standing meetings. Only have a meeting when you need it. Sometimes I keep a standing meeting because I'm worried that I can't schedule people. If you have clients or who are those kinds of organizations that have too many meetings. And I tell people that, we'll cancel if we don't need it. But I do minimum time and minimum use of meetings unless we really think we need it to collaborate. And if we could go on mute, that would be great while we're speaking.
Maybe cut it, by the way.
Yes, thousands of meetings, Jackie. The second is to be prepared, and then we have a framework for that as well, and we use the acronym CLEAR. Can we have whoever's out there go on mute? Because they're not at the computer. Can you mute them, Sean? Okay, so C is for concise purpose, kind of connected to testing for value add. Be really clear on what the meeting's for. Too many times people see meetings pop up on their calendar. They don't know what it's for. They may not show up to it. This is particularly important if you are working with people who are executives, who are completely overscheduled. So a lot of us as consultants are working with executives, and it's really important to be specific. So secondly, the leader. Know who is actually leading the meeting. A lot of times, particularly in the corporate environment, people get in the room and they're like, okay, why are we here? We're not really sure. We had some like hot potato problem that we needed to solve, and we didn't really figure out who's actually leading the meeting.
Yeah.
The third is my favorite, essential people. Make sure that you have the right people in the room and not people who are there just to hear what's going on. It's just distracting, to be quite honest. And it also contributes to the too many meetings culture that we see a lot of in Silicon Valley. Agenda, I think that goes without saying. And the last is reading, a really pre-reading. As Jenny said, pre-reading makes a bad acronym. We didn't want it to be CLEAP, which makes her laugh every time. So in our workshop, we go a lot more deeply into each of these. But for today, we just want to make sure you have this groundwork, and we'll lean back on it when we start talking about dealing with those unruly personalities, because being organized up front is really the key.
Yeah, yeah.
So the third one is to anticipate key influencers. That means, like, for us, particularly as consultants, this one's a really good one, because it's just thinking about ahead of time, who's going to be in the meeting, who has a strong opinion, who has an opinion that matters, who has a strong opinion that doesn't matter. And you think about that ahead of time in order to facilitate the meeting to get it to its best outcomes. So for example, I'd say the second thing is I think about Dan Levin, Jenny, who's someone that we both work for, who's an executive. I've worked for him a long time. I know his style. I know he wants to get straight to the chase. He's the decision maker. He doesn't want to see the data unless he asks for it, but then he wants to see the data if he asks for it. Other people might want to see data before you're making a recommendation, for example. So know that about the decision makers and key influencers. You want to add anything to that, Jenny?
Nope, that is exactly right. So the fourth and fifth step is where we're going to spend most of our time today. And that is recognize those potential disruptors, the people who maybe with the best of intentions end up taking your meetings off course. And we're going to give you some tools and techniques for mastering the room so that when things start to go off course, even when you've done all your best in this preparation, when things start to go off course, you know how you can rein things back in.
This is the fun part.
Heck yeah, I like this part.
So how many of you have recognized these potential disruptors? The first one is the watcher. And we want to hear from you here instead of just lecturing. How many of you see the people who sit back in the room, they don't seem engaged, but then as soon as the meeting ends, they walk up to you and they say, I don't really know why we went in that direction. Or they go talk to other people and they have that meeting outside the meeting. Anybody want to chime in if you experienced having somebody who's a watcher? Do you feel like you're potentially a watcher? Jackie, you said you've been in a lot of meetings.
Sorry, Nikki was just jumping in.
Nikki, I'm having trouble seeing everybody on the... Go ahead, Jenny.
I would say I've seen it. I've been in a lot of meetings. I haven't facilitated a ton of them. I've also been, I would say, consider myself a watcher from time to time. And sometimes I would say the reason I don't speak up in the meeting is either A, I don't feel like my opinion is always valued, Or that maybe I don't completely understand what they're talking about,
Mm,
and maybe I'm completely off base.
Mhm.
yeah,
Okay,
good. And I see Teresa has a nice comment. She often needs time to process before she can
Yes.
jump in. And that is a key point around the watcher. And we will get to that in a little bit.
yeah. How about the next one?
Oh,
The
wait,
off tracker.
okay,
Let's just jump to the next one, Jenny.
sure.
The off tracker can't seem to stay on topic. For example, in a meeting focused on customer service calls, engineers start solving the problem. That's the classic one for me in my experience doing program management in tech. Anybody resonate with the off tracker or have those in your meetings?
Nikki's shaking her, nodding her
Nikki's
head.
shaking her head. Anyone? Rosa, did
Jackie?
you want to contribute?
Oh, sorry, it looks like Jackie had something to say.
Yeah, the one that really annoys me is I start the meeting saying, here's the agenda. Do you want to add anything to the agenda? The people
Yeah.
start discussing the items in the agenda
Oh,
instead of contributing to the agenda. They
uh-huh.
want to, and that just drives me crazy. And I have to say, we're just doing the agenda now. Please
Yeah.
wait. We'll get to that item later.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah, that's we'll talk about this learning to politely redirect, right?
I think you have to make a distinction between people that are jumping to the consequences of an issue and people that start to talk about last night's baseball game, or wasn't that a terrible rainstorm we had yesterday, or why did so and so wear that to the company meeting?
Yes.
To me, it's there's two different kinds of off tracking.
Yeah,
Yes.
exactly.
Yeah.
You know, it's good to warm up the room for the people who said they have less experience. I like to warm up the room and talk about the baseball game, but you have to be a good facilitator and cut that off after 2 or 3 minutes once everybody's in the room, and then move it forward and not go back to it, right? And say, okay, social, and I tend to be assertive. Okay, social time's over. Time to get to the agenda, and don't really mess with it. We're gonna
So there's
go ahead.
one more. There's one more, and that's the elephant in the room. Supposing you had a meeting about planning the service contracts for next year,
Okay.
but 15 minutes before the meeting, one of the customers went ballistic. So of course, everybody wants to talk about
Talk
this
about that.
customer problem,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
you're almost better to cancel the meeting and have a separate meeting about the elephant, rather than just having half the people not even know what they're talking about and the other half wanting to, yell because we screwed up. So
Yeah.
the elephant in the room is a big problem.
Yeah.
I
Jackie.
like that, Jackie. We're gonna come back to that when we talk about the parking lot tool.
Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, the next one is the know-it-all. Seems to have something to say about everything. They may slow down the meeting and want to have the last word in any debate. I know my child does that with me, my 20-year-old, but you see it at work as well, where they can't be a watcher. Anybody recognize that one in themselves or run into it in meetings?
Carl.
Carl?
Yeah, I have a couple of meetings I lead, and there's one person in there who just can't shut up, which is really a problem.
Oh dear.
And I have to be very forceful and sometimes even up to the point of being rude
Mm.
in order to get them to recognize that. But anyway, and then of course I've had off trackers all the time. When you have an engineering meeting, it's easy to get off track onto a technical detail, which, as you said, should be talked about in another meeting.
Yes,
So,
absolutely. And with those know-it-alls, like I told Jenny, every once in a while I say, Jenny, we really need an interrupter. But and a lot of these archetypes that we've created could be interrupters. Raina,
Yeah.
did you want to add anything? You said in teaching you run into that.
Yes, it's a particular program that I teach, and there's another student who's a self-proclaimed expert. She's really good at smiling, get attention, but she's never been able to finish a single thought, a single concept. And when she's in the class, she'll ask to co-teach right there. while it's in process.
Yeah.
I've learned
Yeah.
not to invite her,
Yes. That's,
but I know that does, I doubt I'm the only one who's ever experienced that.
Yeah.
yeah, for
And the
sure.
question is really, are they part of those essential people that we talked about in our CLEAR acronym, right? If she's not essential, don't invite her, actually.
Yeah.
So
I
the next
could-
one, go ahead.
Oh, yeah, like I said, I've blocked her said for a while, but I'm assuming occasionally it shows up.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the things, if this is in a professional setting, you know, it's important to have her there if you need her and learn to manage her. But if she doesn't need to be there, don't invite her.
Yeah.
The next one is the naysayer, and there are 5, by the way. The naysayer, they find holes in anything. They see corner cases. Again, I've worked with a lot of engineers. That engineer that sees a corner case and a yeah, but in everything. Anybody recognize that one in yourselves or anybody else?
Carl?
Yeah, and that can be particularly disturbing. Again, I most of the meetings that I attend where these kind of things occur are design reviews,
Yes.
and they
So,
really,
yeah.
really,
Yeah.
this person had thought about this, had thought about that, thought about this, had thought about that, thought about this, thought about that, and you say, well, is it dominant? You know, basically it's like a lot of things. Someone says, is it possible? This is in the news all the time. Is it possible that there could be an earthquake simultaneous to a rainstorm simultaneous to an atomic bomb? I said, yeah, but it's highly unlikely. Anyway, and
Yes.
those kind of people are
That's-
quite
yeah.
challenging.
Yes. They
Yeah.
are. Yes.
And we may or may not get to the naysayer today. So I'll say, like, one of our #1 tips is, you know, again, using my favorite thing of let's hold that till later, but also maybe holding the letter and asking them to quantify the impact. Like, does it matter that could happen at the same time? The likelihood is 1 in gazillion. So why don't we not worry about it?
I have a
All right.
Wait,
go
I
ahead.
actually have a question.
yeah.
Not sure if this qualifies as a naysayer. This is in the role of technical writer, trying to get information to complete a manual, such as admin manual or something like that.
Yeah.
And this occurs if there's only one key or supposedly there's only one key person. And I get these things like, oh, it can't, there's no point explaining it to me because I won't understand it. Or everybody who works with us already knows this. I've come across that. That's actually telling me their project doesn't work and they can't fix it. They haven't figured it out yet. So they're in denial mode. Does this go into the naysayer mode, or is this something else?
It sounds a little like something else to me. It sounds a little bit like uh, defensive behavior, maybe. Like if they really haven't completed the work and they don't really understand, you know, they really can't explain it so that it can get in the manual. It might be a little bit of defensive.
If it matters my view, it's like it's saving face, not
Yeah.
acknowledging I can't fix, I don't know how, I might never be able to fix it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, just thought I'd ask. Thanks.
Yeah, that's a good
And
one.
and I see this as well. My husband's a technical writer, but in meetings, design reviews and so on. And unfortunately, it's often a person, an executive who does this. This section is not well designed. Go fix it.
Oh, right.
No specifics. What part
Yeah.
of it is okay? What part? And I always, when I do lessons learned meetings and stuff, I always start with the positives, and everybody wants to jump into the negatives immediately. Even if
Yes.
95% of the project was good, they only want to talk about the 5% that's bad.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's a real
And
challenge to get them.
Yeah, and I like to frame those lessons learned meetings into, well, what should we do rather than what worked well? What should we repeat? And then people tend to engage in that if you're asking the question, what should we repeat, as opposed to just like, you know, what went well. They kind of sometimes blank out on that and just want to get to what they need to fix. I tend to want to jump into what we need to fix, so I relate to that.
Well, and we've done this in classes. We say, what should we do more of and what should we do less of?
Yes.
Yeah.
At the end of
Exactly.
the class. And that usually focus them more on, you know, what went well as things that weren't so good.
Nikki,
Yeah.
you have your
So-
hand up.
Well, we're gonna pause here actually, if that's okay, and
You don't want to do the two hand up guys?
Yeah.
We're
They've
gonna
been waiting
demonstrate.
patiently.
I
guess
We
not.
can,
Okay.
but I'm trying to demonstrate facilitation here in order to get through the content. We're gonna pause. What I'd like you to do is put it in the chat. And if you put it in the chat, Jenny can answer it while I go through the last person. How's that? So please, Larry and I think Nikki, put your questions in the chat and we'll get it there. The last one is the repeater. So the repeater says something, and I know I'm the one who's, hey, didn't I just say that? And the repeater's getting the credit for it, or the repeater didn't really need to repeat it because everyone seemed to get it. But sometimes they're doing it for purpose, which we'll get to in a moment when we get to the meat of the slides. Anybody resonate with the repeater?
So that's me. I'm a repeater sometimes, and I try to rein myself in, but sometimes I just want to say it again in different words. And I know it can distract and take time away.
Okay. So Jenny, take it forward.
Okay. So we're going to talk a little bit about how you can really get the most out of everyone, because people who display these archetypal behaviors have a lot to offer. They just sometimes don't have the skills to offer in a way that is consumable. So you need to balance keeping control of the room, making sure that you stay on task, that you have an agenda, that you follow, that you keep track of surprise issues that pop up, while still ensuring that everyone there can contribute to the best of their ability. So these are kind of some universal meeting leadership tips. Before we talk about how to specifically manage each of those archetypes. Obviously, use your agenda. You're all probably pretty practiced at that one. And don't be afraid to redirect. It's okay to politely interrupt, or even more forcefully interrupt if you need to. You can ask, hang on a second, I'm not sure how that connects. Can you tell me how that's relevant? You can use, this is one of my favorite techniques, recap what the other person said in order to take control back and then move on to the next. So,
and you said you're the repeater. You get to do that as the facilitator.
yeah, exactly. It plays right into one of my challenges. So I recap what Debbie said, and then I move to the next slide because we got to keep things moving. All right. So something that is also worth using, which we don't have on the slide. Oh, we have it on the slide. Sorry. Getting commitments in the meeting. Make sure that if you've come to some sort of a decision or some sort of a conclusion, ensure that everyone who's important there, especially those influencers, maybe even say with their words, yes, I agree, this is the thing we should do. Yes, I'm committed to this direction. That helps shut down things like those meetings outside of meetings where maybe a watcher didn't raise an issue, but then afterwards buttonhole somebody and says, yeah, I don't think that was going to work. That is going to work because of this. All right. And then the parking lot. We love the parking lot. And of course, the parking lot is just a place to write down where everyone can see sometimes. Like if you're in a room, put it on the whiteboard. If you're in a Zoom, share a document where you write down the issue that was raised that wasn't relevant to your agenda. That enables you to simply say, hey, great idea. Let me jot that down. It's not something we can talk about today because we don't have time. And then at the end of the meeting, you make sure you do go through that parking lot and say, is this still an issue? Do we need a follow-up meeting? Can someone take this on? That's an action item I'll follow up with. Make sure you go through every item in the parking lot, and you will find, my experience is maybe 50% of the time, the person who raised the issue will say, you know what, that's not really a problem. And
yeah, and I think, go ahead, Jenny, sorry.
I was just going to say that helps people feel heard. It validates that you care about what they have said, but it also ensures that you can stay on track and important issues that really need to be raised and addressed aren't lost. So that's why we love the parking lot, one of our favorite tools.
And I just wanted to add, because I've been thinking about the parking lot with some of these questions and discussions. I'll give you an example. I was running meetings that were promotion meetings, discussions at a client, and I was the project manager and facilitator of the meeting, and people were really going off course a lot. And we just would say, okay, we got to get through 10 candidates in this time. You're spending a lot of time on this candidate. You can't come to an agreement. Let's just put that person's name in the parking lot.
Yeah.
And then we would have the leaders regroup later and talk about that candidate when there wasn't like 20 people in the room. So it really can be a powerful tool to keep things moving.
Yeah. Yeah. All right. So Larry has a question. I just want to take a moment to read community meetings.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm having trouble with my computer right now. So Jenny, you might need to take the next slide.
Sure. Yeah. So, but what's the best way to say something without hurting her feelings, but needing to show that we have to? Yeah. Yeah. So Larry, I think maybe a similar kind of a parking lot technique to say, wow, what's her name? Dina. Wow,
What's her
Dina,
name,
this
yeah.
is such interesting stuff. I'm afraid we don't have, well, how would I say it? I would say something like, this is really cool stuff. I would love to hear more, and I'm sure others would too. Let's put it in the parking lot to schedule a time where we can learn more about what you have to share. We need to get back to our agenda now, so I'm gonna pause you there. But you know, at the end of the meeting, we'll figure out a time where we can hear more. I don't know. So would something like that work?
Well, not only will it work, Jenny, but I think when these meetings started, we intentionally set aside I don't know what we called it, but a time like that at the end. So maybe we just got to start enforcing what we as a
There
group
you go.
intended to do in the beginning.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Actually, that's another great idea. It's like, hey, let's get through our current topics so that we
Yeah.
have time at the end to hear more of these cool stories. Thank you, Larry. Great. Okay. I will take the next slide. Okay, so this is where we're going to talk about let's see, how are we doing on time? We're kind of okay on time. We're going to talk about a couple of these archetypes. We're going to ask you to brainstorm with us about where you can find strength in a couple of these. So let's
Yeah.
start with the watcher. I'm sorry, David, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to interrupt Jenny and just set that up a little bit too before we do the brainstorm.
Yeah.
We just want to say that there's two things we're going to do now with a couple of the archetypes. We're going to talk about the idea of seeing the strengths in everyone, that we have positive points of views. Yes, there's politics, and yes, people may have poor motivations, but they also usually don't mean to be, you know, a railroad running people over. So what we want you to do is think about what are the strengths in everyone. And so you can see we kind of started a list of the strengths. In our longer workshop, we go through each of these. But I just wanted you to take a look at the slide, and you can see a couple of examples of like what the strengths might be of some of these folks. And what we're going to do now, as Jenny said, is move into a brainstorm. Sorry, go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, no worries. Yeah, so let's dive into the watcher and the know-it-all. So let's start with watcher. One of the strengths that we are conscious of in these folks that don't say much in meetings is sometimes, well, as Teresa said, she might need a little bit of time to think. And in that thinking time, she's putting together unique perspectives or insights that might not have been available if she hadn't spent the time to really put the pieces together. So that's one strength of the watcher. What are some other strengths that you guys can think of for people who don't share much in the meeting?
So
Anat, did you want to add anything?
Sorry, Rosa was talking.
I was going to say I'm a bit of a watcher. I kind of recognize that I'm an introvert, so I do try to think things through. So when I do say something, it's been thought through versus I think a lot of people are better at brainstorming, and I actually find that a little bit frustrating sometimes.
Yeah.
Incomplete thoughts.
Yeah. Good. Thank you. Who else?
I see give the group writing time. That's definitely one of our tips for managing them.
Yep.
They don't want to share incomplete thoughts. True. What's their strength? Their strength is probably in that they have a lot to say. They actually might even be an expert on something which overlaps with another one. Right.
Yeah.
So, but they also don't like to be called on. Like, for example, I tried to do this and then didn't realize something. I didn't see someone speaking, but I'm not. How do you feel about the fact that I'm calling on you and asking you what you think about the Watcher?
Like I'm under scrutiny and I'm stressed. I have to have a response, or I don't have anything to say, or something
Yeah.
like that. It's not an acceptable response. It's
Yeah.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
I mean,
It's a mistake to try and force an introvert to share incomplete thoughts.
Yeah.
It's
It's a
a
mistake, but
facilitation error.
it is and it isn't, because, and this is one of the things I find easier to do in person, because you can read body language more easily in person. But what I have experienced is that sometimes if I just let there be a pause, like my mistake was I called a not first, right? If I let there be a pause and there's time and I say, Anat, do you have anything to add? Then maybe, and I'm sorry I'm picking on you, Anat, probably because I know you a little bit. Do you have anything to add? She could say no, or I'll get to you later. Or I could say, encourage people to, when we're online, give us your input in the chat, like we're seeing some folks do here. I don't think it's a mistake to call on them. I do it actually a lot. So, and sometimes it doesn't work, but a lot of times it does work. You just have to, that's where it comes to working on your timing and giving them an out is what I think of. I don't know, Jenny, if you want to add anything to
Yeah,
it.
that's exactly it. And Rena has a point about sometimes she does the asking after the meeting, not during the meeting, with someone who might be a watcher.
Yeah, and one of the problems in some kinds of meetings, like decision-making meetings, that can be so undermining to get those insights after a decision's been made. So it also depends on the type of meeting that you're leading, whether it's okay to ask later, or maybe to give that watcher a heads up and even before the meeting and say, we really need your input in that meeting.
So why not make it open-ended and say, does anyone have anything to add? As opposed to
Absolutely.
calling on a person.
Yep.
Sometimes they still won't add. We definitely do. Does anybody have anything to add? Go ahead, Jenny.
Yeah, being invited, sometimes, depending on the person, but being invited to share, we have found at least in our work, that leads to some really interesting input and insights that if we had simply said, does anyone have anything to share or add, the person might not have felt comfortable jumping in. So I think it's a mix of using both those kinds of techniques, certainly leaving space, letting anyone add something. Also depends, something that Rena mentioned as well, building a relationship. There's a trust component here, especially in a room like this. We don't know you guys. You don't know us. If you have ongoing relationships with folks, building that trust so that you do know when someone has got some experience or expertise that you want to tease out, they might feel more comfortable sharing. I see Anat has her hand up.
yes, I wanted to add that in terms of if anyone has anything to add, I usually change that to who. I don't know if people here have watched Ferris Bueller's Day Off. Anyone? It's not. You just change it to who, and it's different. Anyone is very much in the air, and you can kind of like just the who.
Yeah, so
Who
who has
has
something to add?
Like, oh yeah, I'm
like
a who. I'm not anyone. I'm a who. So.
Yeah.
Yes, you are a who. And there's humor too, which again, as you get to know people.
Yeah.
Let's move to know-it-all, the strengths. We're not talking about meeting tips at this point. We're talking about strengths.
Yeah, what's the strength of a know-it-all?
They're not afraid to speak up.
Yeah. How is that a strength? What does that offer to the group?
It gets their ideas out on the table, so that everyone can consider.
Yeah, absolutely. And as our what we wrote in here, one of the key strengths of a know-it-all is they actually do know something. They probably have some area of expertise. The problem often is they will share that expertise, or they will think they're an expert in other areas where they really aren't.
Mm-hmm.
And so getting to know what they really know and what you can count on for them is key.
They're also providing oftentimes perspectives that everyone else may have never thought about,
Yeah, yeah,
just
for sure.
from personal experience.
Yeah,
Yeah. One of the things I think about is that they model engagement. So, you know, and
Yeah.
it's hard, you know, just because we said someone's a know-it-all, it doesn't mean they're the person who's talking the whole time. But they can model engagement, and sometimes that's a good thing too.
yeah,
You'd like to also think that they're well-learned people. They're the kind of people that read everything and, you know, wide number of subjects. So at least they're getting great information and content from many sources. I think that's always a
Yes.
positive.
yes. And you want to leverage that in your meetings. You want to understand context, or you want to have
Right.
some answers in certain areas. So absolutely the expert. I didn't mention this, but you can see we've renamed the archetypes here so that the watcher is really a deep thinker. The know-it-all is an expert. The off-tracker sometimes can connect things. The naysayer can bring up important questions. The repeater can synthesize information and help others understand. So these are ways of reframing when you have one of those challenging personalities in your meeting. If you can think about them in these more positive terms, that know-it-all who's talking a lot about something is actually an expert in that thing. So where can you find the nuggets? Where can you take advantage of that expertise? All right. Debbie, shall we move on?
Yes.
All right.
Okay, so we're gonna kind of circle back as we've kind of see what oh my gosh, I just lost the screen again, Jenny. That's okay.
Oh.
So we're gonna circle back, and then we're gonna now go to what are the tips? We've already kind of touched on tips a little bit, but we were trying really hard to think about what's the good in these archetypes before we jump into tips for facilitating them. We're not gonna actually, we're gonna brainstorm on tips to draw out their strengths and redirect what we would consider unruly behavior that can take a meeting off track. Remember, your starting points are going back to your agenda. Oh, that's a very good point. Let's get back on topic. Don't be afraid to redirect. I was talking to a friend of mine about this topic, and she said her problem is that she's an introvert, and she's just kind of, she's not comfortable redirecting and jumping in. And I think that's something where you just have to work on finding your courage to redirect people.
Right. And have a little script, have a few words that you can use comfortably, like, hey, that's a great point. Let me put it on the parking lot, and let's get back to our agenda. Or I need to stop you there because I'm noticing the time. I want to be conscious of everyone's effort in this meeting. Let's get back on track. Whatever the little script is that you can practice to be comfortable interrupting.
So who would like to start us off on facilitation tips for the watcher or the deep thinker to draw them out in the meeting as opposed to outside the meeting? I just tried your who. Go ahead, Nikki.
I'm gonna say allow them time. I know sometimes they're competing for the stronger voices. And so then they just sit back. Never mind, it's not worth competing.
Yeah.
Yes. In fact, one of the things I do, if it's a brainstorming meeting or like a lessons learned, like Jackie was talking about that she facilitates, I create time for those people to think and for their contribution to be made. So I'll hand out Post-it notes for people to write down their thoughts. That's really a way to create the space for those watchers to think and for their contribution to be heard, because oftentimes in those kind of meetings, we say, okay, let's pick up the stickies and affinitize them, and you get them engaged, and then you can say, oh, who wrote this? And then they can talk about their sticky without being felt like they're being put on the spot.
Yeah, and to both Teresa and Sean tossed out the pre-reading idea, which is exactly why we have that as one of our fundamentals in our clear framework, the last piece, the reading piece. There are folks who get a huge amount of benefit from having pre-reading material so that they can think in advance, they can organize their thoughts and ideas. Now, and Sean, you also had, yeah, this pairwise breakouts. I hadn't thought of that. That's an interesting one. I think we should add that.
Have you heard of right pair share?
No.
Go ahead and share.
So whether it's a brainstorming, so typically it's for problem solving or brainstorming.
Yeah.
So the challenge is the extroverts are ready to throw half-baked stuff out right away, and the introverts are composing their thinking. So 3 or 4 extroverts have launched off before the introverts have even got their thoughts collected. So what you do is you do a writing section first. Everybody has a
Yeah.
chance to write. Then you say, would you guys compare notes and pair them up so they get a chance to compose their
Talk about it,
answer.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
And then you go around and have them share it with the group.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Love it. Thank you, Sean.
Anybody want to add anything to Watcher before we move to Know It All? Or who would like to add to Watcher? Okay. Rosa, were you going to speak or you're just not on mute?
I was just giggling.
Okay.
Very
Let's move to Know It. Okay, great. Let's move to Know It All then. So we talked about the Know It All strengths. They actually might be an expert and have something to contribute. What are some tips for working with that person, for redirecting that person and not having them overtake the meeting?
So I actually have used that as a tactic to also get the watcher involved of okay, can we hear from others on this topic?
Oh.
And then kind of cold call the watcher. I actually don't think it's bad to cold call the watchers, but being a watcher. Yeah.
Okay.
Good. Thank you.
Thank you for engaging, Mr. Watcher. Anybody else want to, what about the know-it-all? So I'll throw one out. The one of the things with the know-it-all is to just, I think Jenny already said this, acknowledge their input. Thank you so much for that insight. We're gonna pause here and we're gonna move on, right? That type of thing.
Yeah.
This is where you need to be brave.
Yeah.
Jenny, you want to add anything?
Well, one of my favorites with the know-it-all, once you get to that with the expert, once you get to know exactly what their area of expertise is, then you just ask them a specific question about that area, and then you're going to get really good answers. That's one of their strengths, and it helps keep them focused on the particular thing you're trying to address. And you can always bring them back. You can say, oh, if they're wandering off in another direction, oh, hang on. Let's see if we can solve this problem, or let's flesh out this particular idea you tossed out, or oh wait, you had a really good nugget. I want to understand this thing more, right? Like help keep them focused with those kinds of phrases. Anything else on the table? Who else has anything to share on expert tips for getting the best out of an expert? And actually, we forgot to say this earlier, but these tips, you might notice they're kind of two flavors. There's the tip to help avoid the disruptive behavior, like the parking lot that works for many people. And there are the tips that help draw out the strengths. So how do you limit the disruption, and how do you bring out the productive abilities? So when you're thinking about how to handle folks, you've got both of these options as you do your facilitation.
Yeah.
All right. So, oh, sorry, Debbie, this is you.
That's okay. Go ahead, go for it.
No, you got it.
So here's how we put it all together across the archetypes. You can see we like to put thought into the strengths of all of them, right? The off-tracker might be a highly creative person, for example. And you need to maybe give them time, but find a way to limit it. And a lot of times I do that by having the meeting be very structured and giving everybody an opportunity for input within that structure. We are not going to go into all of these. We didn't spend as much time on tips as we thought we would, but we do want to leave time to ask, does anybody have any specific questions that we didn't hit on our topics in our workshop, we go into a lot more detail on this, or we can pick up another archetype if you'd like to do that. Anybody have an opinion here? Okay, well, we'll just move forward.
All right. So this is the ad we have for the workshop we have coming up. This is a live, what we call a cohort-based workshop, where it's 4 sessions, an hour each, over Zoom with the same group of people, where we go into a lot more detail around each of these archetypes. And we also spend some time on the fundamentals, because some of our attendees will be more at the start of their facilitation careers. And it's going to be super fun. We're going to go into lots more detail. If you or anybody that you know, clients, colleagues, you think might benefit from this. Oh, and by the way, we do, it's very interactive, like our workshops, but like this talk, our workshops go into a lot of opportunity for practice and discussion and sharing. So you can sign up on our website. There is a QR code that has our has the link directly to the sign up, and we would love to see you or someone you know in the class. Debbie, anything to add? All right.
No,
So,
ma'am.
yeah, so now it's time for questions.
I have a question about the parking lot. How would you, so I work with an organization, so I'm in the meetings all the time, multiple meetings. How would you introduce the use of the parking lot across the board?
Yeah, I think if you are facilitating the meeting, it's pretty straightforward. You simply say, hey, I'm going to stick this piece of Post-it paper up on the wall, and I'll just use it to jot down things that we want to keep track of that aren't on the agenda. But are you asking how would you get other facilitators to do that?
Yes.
Yeah. You know, it depends on how comfortable you feel in the meeting and where you feel like kind of your balance of power and influence is. But you can simply, when somebody goes off track and you see an opportunity for a parking lot to work, you can just suggest it. You can say, hey, I don't want us to lose that thought. Can we jot it down in a parking lot, and so that we can deal with it later?
Yeah, the other thing is, if it's, I don't know, Nikki, if you're in person, or it doesn't matter if you're in person or online, if you could also host a lunch and learn. I've done that at clients where, you know, I'll be like, hey, let's make things, come learn about parking lots, or come learn about making your meetings better, or something like that, you know, put it in a way that's attractive based on their culture. But you could also do a lunch and learn that you invite the people, particularly if you know the particular people who you're trying to influence to get better, and do it a little more structured as well.
Yeah, now Gant has a question. How do you deal with running meetings that are hybrid? And
yes,
that is such a challenge. Unfortunately, I don't think we have any silver bullets, but the techniques of keeping track of who has been talking and invite the remote attendees by name to share. You can warn them in advance. You can say, hey, this is a hybrid meeting, and we got to make sure that we in the room aren't overwhelming the conversation. So I'm going to pause us. Debbie's really good at this. I'm going to pause us regularly and make sure that the people on the phone, the people in the remote sites can have a chance to share their thinking.
Yeah. And we didn't actually, I'm looking at the names here, and I see a couple people we didn't really call on. But like, for example, I might even say, hey, Jeff, we haven't heard from you, Jeff. Do you have anything to add to that idea? So Jeff, do you have anything to add?
Oh, thank you for calling on me. Wonderful. No, I don't. I'm actually listening in the background as I'm working. So I appreciate just to be able to listen in, and I'll probably listen more to the recording later.
Great.
Okay.
I almost wasn't even able to join, so appreciate it though.
Well, I'm glad you were auditing, and I'm glad you're letting us know you're auditing. The other thing
Thank
is
you.
I ask people to show their faces, if they would be willing to. I know some people prefer not to. And you could even, you know, I love that Jeff just said he's auditing. Stephen, you wanted to add something?
Oh, you're on mute. We see your face, but we don't hear your voice. There we go.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, we can.
Sure, yeah, thanks. I had a question earlier. I missed the beginning for the archetypes. So okay, those are like the 5 problem archetypes as you see them. What do you call people who sort of go along with the flow and aren't any of those archetypes, but unwittingly contribute to bad decisions by simply
Opting out.
not even opting out. I mean, let's say picking the most politically favorable opinion instead of whatever the optimal or nominal opinion is, which I see a lot. Like I see a lot of that. Like a lot of meetings are not constructed to find an optimal decision. They're constructed to bless or reinforce or construct, as Noam Chomsky would say, construct a pretense of what would you say, popular support for a certain point of view. I don't know how much you see. Depending on the company, you can see a lot of that.
Huh. Stephen, I'm not sure I have seen that.
Yeah, I would say that still kind of gets to a little bit of the watcher activity where they're not really contributing. But I would say in particular, when it comes to decision making, I just put in the chat this author, Annie Duke. She's an author and a speaker, and she has some great content around decision making. We run a decision making workshop that's really focused on being like the decision making driver and being the person who's getting the decisions made and how to kind of organize that, kind of a project management oriented type framework.
Yeah.
But Annie Duke is really great at like, how do you get the best decision made? She used to be a poker player. And she's like, I just recommend her. I don't have the particular link to her thing handy right here, but go look up Annie Duke. And it looks like Sean has made a recommendation for someone as well.
And Debbie, I think what you said too about our workshop. So Stephen, sometimes when people are more performing in order to, sort of build political points or get along, it can be helpful to have a structure that enables them to be a little bit more honest, a little bit more direct, because they're working toward the structure and not just a little bit more free-form conversation. And, and one way to do that is with our decision-making framework. We teach the DAISY, but there are other ones where you're very clear on the roles. So there's a driver of the decision, there's an approver of the decision, and then there are contributors. And within that framework, sometimes we use our project management concepts to construct for decisions in particular, a criteria for how the decision is going to be made and who is going to provide various pieces of input around that decision. So maybe that can help some of these people who are reluctant to dive into the real issues or connect with the real challenges. It gives them more permission because, well, it's what the framework is requiring. I don't know. I'm stretching a little bit.
And I have one last thing, and then I want to see if anyone else has a question, which is, this is where the beauty of virtual tools comes in, where people can actually do anonymous inputs. And so if they're afraid they don't want to be the person making these suggestions, if there's some kind of fear involved, you can also do, blind input.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Well, I'm glad you brought up Annie Duke because her latest book is called Quit. How do you know when to stop?
Oh, yeah.
And, anything from stopping your PhD to stopping this meeting, sometimes that's necessary. You just say, we're not getting anywhere. Let's just think some more about our agenda and who should be here and so on, and just stop the meeting. And I think that could address this idea that someone has come in, usually an executive who's already made up his mind, her mind, and I always amused when you have a big layoff and there's these frequently asked questions. How can there be FAQ when this is the first time anybody ever heard of this layoff? They're just planted by HR, right? They're just made up by HR. So yeah, I think that it's really important that sometimes you just say, we're going round in circles. We need to, think about this and come back with a more productive approach.
Yeah.
Yeah. I absolutely agree, Jackie. And that's like, I mean, that's kind of the concept of the parking lot, whether you're calling it that or not. I love the way you just phrased that. Like, hey, why don't we just pause and come back? I like that. Anybody else want to add anything before we wrap?
Yeah, I want to, I put out in chat about a group I'm with, and we decided not to do hybrid meetings. I think a lot of people comment, hybrid meetings to do the right way are challenging.
Yeah.
I
So we
agree.
made the decision simply to, one of our, these are weekly meetings, once a month. The first one will be in person only. The rest will remain online only. And I think with that strategy in mind, we then can, with the people involved in each one, we will develop specific content and things that occur with each one. And I think, in terms of the development, we'll reassess probably by the end of the first quarter and see if we want to continue that or go back or whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. And that works if I'm sorry, Jenny, I jumped on you. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, I was just gonna say that's funny, Larry. I was at a board meeting last night I'm on the board of a social group. And we meet once a month 1 month in person, and then the next month all on Zoom.
There you
It's a
go.
great technique for kind of striking the right balance of seeing each other in person, which is lovely, but also not having to go out on a rainy night. And
Yeah.
so.
Yeah,
So-
well, in our case, of course, we have people simply do not live in the mid-peninsula, so they, the Bay Area or beyond. We've had a lady join us in the Washington DC area, so
Oh, my
we
goodness.
have to keep the online going. Obviously.
90% of the company I work for is in India. It's hard to
Well, that
afford
too.
for me to
Yeah.
go there or for them to come
that-
here. So
I was just typing that in, Jackie. It's if you have a global team, you just have to be good at getting those Indian teams to speak.
well, and not every meeting has to be in the US time zone either.
Yes.
Yeah,
Once in a
that-
while, the people here, even if they're the executives, they need to be willing to meet at midnight because the
Absolutely
India team
agree.
does that all the time,
Yeah.
that type
Yeah.
of thing.
Okay, well, I think we need to give you guys a chance to get to your next meeting or your lunch or whatever else. Thank you so much for all of your engagement. I'm typing in our email, and we'll put in our email and our website for you guys if you want to follow up with us. And thank you so much, Teresa, for inviting us.
Yeah.
Thank you guys very much.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Bye.